Hi everyone, and welcome to the board, connecting you to the world of Agile. My name is Paul Llewellyn. I'm one of the Agile coaches here at Boost, and sitting next to me on the couches are two of the other Agile coaches.
Yes, I'm one of them, Gavin Coughlin, been an Agile coach here at Boost for quite some time.
And I'm Kirsten Donaldson. What are we talking about today, Paul?
Well, we're here to
talk...
Hi
everyone, and welcome to the board.
Sorry, we're just going to turn the sound down on the laptop, and we're talking about.
Good start.
We're going to talk about some of the issues that we see introducing Agile and Scrum to some new teams, and then we thought we'd follow on with, like, as we saw it progressing and the team maturing and so on, some of the issues and some of the things you have to deal with as the team matures with the Agile Scrum approach.
Should we start with new teams? Some things that we've found with new teams, problems. One of the interesting things that we've been talking about lately is things that we can do to encourage new teams that may be resistant to Scrum. So, you know, people who are used to perhaps developer team members who are used to sitting in isolation and working on a piece of code without collaborating with others. What sorts of things have you guys tried to get people working together?
Well, first of all, why do you think people are resistant to Scrum?
I guess a lot of people don't like change, you know, and unless it's quite often if an idea hasn't come from the person themselves, or perhaps it's not being supported by their manager, they may be resistant to the introduction of it. Certainly we've seen that in some situations and heard stories of where that's happened.
And I found some situations where people have had experience of Scrum possibly in the past, and it hasn't gone well for some reason, and usually when you talk to them you find out that it hasn't actually been run properly, or they're missing out bits and really not doing Scrum at all, just doing little bits and pieces of it, and that didn't work out for them, so they kind of blame the process maybe more than the environment they're actually in. So then in that case would you sort of explain that actually this is the way we're going to do it this time? You know, and
see how it works
we're
out.
not going to be doing Scrum without retrospectives, for example. And I've met people who have done that, which hasn't really worked out, and it's missing out such a massive part, and it's not really working for the team if the team can't get together and inspect and adapt and stuff like that. So I mean, that's why I've seen resistance in some people in the past. And
some of the things I've heard, for example, is that, you know, so I've heard it mentioned that Scrum is too prescriptive in the way that the framework is set up and introduced to the team, and that's an interesting thing. I always find that quite interesting in the sense that it's not that big a framework. There's not many. There's 3 roles, 4 meetings, 5 artifacts, something like that. It's not a. And the Scrum guidelines are hardly a novel. There's like 17 pages of information there.
I guess the difference is that when you're walking into a waterfall project, there's nothing up front that tells you how many meetings you're going to be in. I mean, invariably it turns out to be a hell of a lot more than you'd find in the course of a Scrum sprint. But of course you don't get all that information up front in waterfall. It's only sort of 6 months later when you're completely burnt out from sitting in really long meetings that are generally unproductive. So
and there's nothing worse than just unproductive meetings where people are talking in circles. So I think some people come to Scrum thinking it's a long list of rules that they have to stick rigidly to, when, as Paul said, there's actually very few, and they're there to allow for flexibility in every other area, really.
So what I try and do is discuss with the team, why we do some of these things, like why we stand up, for example, and why that meeting's only 15 minutes, why we time box everything. And I certainly experienced those long, drawn-out sit-down meetings where we often went off topic and didn't really discuss the issue at hand, and so on. And that's the whole point, is to remain. The reason we time box and so on is to focus the team on what they're doing and what the job in hand at hand is. And so, and especially with the stand-ups, we stand up so that the meeting doesn't drag on. It's just an update. Sorry, it's not an update. It's a coordination meeting. It's just it's a coordination for the team, and any other conversation that needs to take place can take place after the stand-up's finished.
I think that we've all stood in stand-ups and heard them become quite protracted, whether the team is new or otherwise. And I certainly found that in some situation a team may need to be reminded that it's essentially about those 3 questions. And that we shouldn't be going further than those if it's not necessary. And
conversations which seem to be going off topic a little bit, or just getting too detailed, For example, if you're talking about how you're going to fix something, I think it's up to the Scrum Master to kind of step in and say, well, maybe like it's a useful conversation. Maybe we can take that offline and just, stick to the...
Do a meet after, for example.
And I've seen some stand-ups with new teams which have turned into meetings that people start to resent, and I've turned up and I've seen their stand-ups and they're turning up on time, which is great, but then they're sitting down and they're making coffee and they're having a chat, and by the time the 15 minutes is up, they haven't even started the stand-up. So it's just
it's not called a stand-up for no reason, is it?
And it gets a bit shambolic like that. So again, I think it's up to the Scrum Master to make sure that...
Absolutely.
To enforce, if you like, in some ways.
Be the enforcer.
Yeah, yes. It's interesting because we're going to talk about. We might as well talk about it now. It's a concept that comes from martial arts. It's a Japanese. Well, in particular, this is Japanese martial arts called Shu Ha and Ri, and Shu Ha and Ri is it describes the stages that you go through as a martial artist, if you like, and so you start out at Shu. You're a beginner. You're just learning by rote, if you like. You're just following your instructor, your master. Then Ha, you're progressing in your knowledge and your understanding. So you've understood the core concepts, but now you're beginning to question why those core concepts are what they are, and so you're bending the rules, if you like. You're learning how the rules work so you can bend them. And then the final stage is Ri, where you've become a master in your own right, and then you're actually making the rules.
Okay.
And so and it's interesting. Alistair Cockburn was one of the original signers of the manifesto, the Agile Manifesto, and he brought this concept into Agile, Shu Ha and Ri. It's in his book, one of the first books he wrote, and so it's interesting to see when the Scrum is in the Shu stage, then you have to be far more directive as a coach or a Scrum Master. Is the key thing here, I think. So
you think most new teams would start off in the Shu phase?
I've only worked with a couple of teams where they've had people that have been familiar with Scrum. They've only had one person or two people on the team that have been familiar with Scrum when the team kicked off. So you kind of you work closely with the guys that do know Scrum to introduce the other team members to how Scrum works. It's really useful when you've got somebody on the team who does know Scrum and to help you with that.
And lead by example in the meetings and things like that. So
that's
keeping it tight and stand-ups and just addressing those three questions.
Absolutely, yeah. But I do find at that stage you're being far more directive and to a certain degree you're always reminding the Scrum they started this. If they start the stand up late, they started the stand up late. If sometimes you can ask them questions like, for example, if they continually start the stand ups late, and how is that for everyone? Is that becoming a problem for the team? Do they need to solve that problem? In which case they could talk about
having it at a later time.
If people can't make it, if there's a reason why somebody's persistently late, it might be their train is always late or something like that. They can change the time. Or if there is no reason, do they want to start looking at
putting fines in place or something like that, something drastic.
I find it's often a good idea to tickle the latecomer because it makes them feel so uncomfortable they never do it again.
Have you actually done that? Or is that thanks for that input. I'll be trying that in the next one. I've only had one team who introduced the fine system, and it did work. And they used that fine. It was $1, a gold coin. Yeah, that would put me off being late. Yeah, I think. And then they used the money at the end of the week for whatever they wanted to use the money for, whether it was beer or burgers or whatever they fancied. Did they get that much money that they had enough for more than one beer, for example? It sort of tailed off as people got, because all they had to do to prevent getting a fine was let somebody in the Scrum know that they were going to be late for the meeting. Oh. It was just purely about communication, more than anything, is what the team wanted. As opposed to an attendance thing. Yeah, as an attendance thing. They wanted it to be, if you can't make the Scrum for a valid reason, then
you just have to communicate that. That's all you have to do.
What's a valid reason though if you know it's the same time every morning? I mean,
for instance, one of the guys was being pulled off onto do some other work, some very important work for.
So he had no control over that.
He had no control because it was a manager, a more senior person within the organisation telling him what to do outside of the Scrum.
For the Kay Marr, who you guys both know, Agile Coach from Australia, he suggested he was working with a development team and they were turning up late for their stand-ups. I think you might have heard this before. And he gave people a rubber chicken to hold if they turned up late, and it was meant to sort of make them feel a bit humiliated, and then they turn up on time. But it turns out that the developers loved holding rubber chickens, so he changed it so everybody held a rubber chicken except for the people who were late.
Or he could have done something like maybe get a tiara, something that sort of threatens their masculinity, if it's a group of male developers, which quite often it is.
We have a question.
We have a couple of questions actually, so that's
great.
One from Gareth Morgan. If a team feels they are in Ha or even a Ri, but they really aren't, how do you recover that as a Scrum Master?
Good question. I think it's about having the tools to let them find out what stage they're at, and help them discover whether they feel like they're capable of actually changing.
So if they're perhaps not following the rules of Scrum, like missing some things out though, do you feel that the team should be left to find that out for themselves rather than the Scrum Master reminding them? I
think there's two schools of thought, or certainly I've had two schools of thought around this, which is one, if they want to change it, just let them fail if it doesn't work. So if they don't understand why we do certain things, then they will fail to understand. But they, for example, your example I think was removing the retrospectives. If a team chooses to remove a retrospective from, or the retrospective part from their cycle, then what do you do? I think that was something that's come up before when people don't see the value in it, and they just think it's a waste of.
I mean, certainly, I dealt with a team that actually didn't remove the retrospectives, but decided that they weren't comfortable with the product owner being present at a retrospective. But of course, then the product found that then the team members were coming to them during the week to make suggestions and changes in the Scrum. So really, if that person had been in the retrospective, that could have been addressed during those times. So it was really, they were having mini retrospectives throughout the week anyway, so it kind of we went back to having that person present at retrospectives. But like you say, we did let them fail in that way and discover that really they needed that input.
And I've got another question here. It's a follow-up really from Tony. He's asking also how to handle that for individuals on the team, so individuals who seem to feel like they're in Ha or Ri but really aren't. And I did come across this recently where I joined a team, and there's somebody who had worked in Scrum teams in the past, and they felt they were certainly really au fait with it and in that Ha or Ri phase. And they had some ideas which were certainly outside of the norm. For example, they felt it was absolutely essential that the product owner size the stories
at the same time as the team.
Yes,
not on their own.
Be heavily involved with the sizing of the story.
Interesting.
And this was, they were dead set on this idea, but I just had to explain to this person the reason why the product owner doesn't size, because the product owner isn't going to be doing the work, so can't really possibly know how much work is going to be involved, and the product owner is going to have a different agenda for sizing stories than the team would as well.
What might have happened if you had let that happen? So assuming that you were to let a team fail in that situation, what do you think that would look like?
Well, I'd imagine that they'd see over time that the product owners estimations and ideas why stories should be probably smaller size than the team actually thinks are going to clash with the team a lot. And
so then they wouldn't finish the stories in the sprint, for example?
Yeah, possibly, or else estimating would just become really, really difficult, and backlog grooming sessions would become really difficult because there'd be a bit of a clash.
So they'd never reach consensus kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or they might feel pressure to conform to those smaller sizes perhaps, and then again not finish the stories in the sprint.
Yes.
Morale gets lowered.
Yeah.
Product owners unhappy with productivity. It would raise a lot of issues, I think. And if you did let a team fail in that situation, I wonder how soon that would come out.
Yeah.
Probably quite swiftly, I'd imagine.
Yeah. say probably your first grooming session, it would come out.
And then, you know, at the conclusion of the first sprint that had been sized with the product owner, I think, as well.
I chose not to do it that way, and in retrospect, maybe it could have been a good idea just to let that happen for one session.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to try these things in different situations. I guess you just go with your gut, though, in the situation, don't you?
Yeah. It's like I say, you're caught usually between two things with a coach. It's one, to let the team have the experience and learn from the experience, you know, whatever way it goes. And then the other thing is to offer your experience and try and offer them the advice or coach them through why something might not be a good idea, and I guess which is more powerful. I think learning by experience is the more powerful approach, but often you are caught between those two. And I know,
and you know, we're all growing as Agile coaches and Scrum Masters as well, so you know, we're not always going to nail it the first time. We're all learning as these situations arise, and you know, next time we might think about a different way to do it and see what effect that has.
We do have another question, sort of a follow-on as well, from Tony. Is it appropriate to take those members of the team to one side to educate them individually, or should all of this be left to the team to handle in the retros? I personally think, it's absolutely appropriate to take these people aside and coach them individually. I'd say that's one of the responsibilities of a Scrum Master, really, and you can't really leave it up to be handled in the retros at all times, because sometimes it won't come up in the retro, or if it is a problem with an individual, it's not a good idea for everybody to be pointing fingers at a retrospective. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you think it would be appropriate to coach them individually?
I think it depends on what's happening with that team member, you know, what the situation is. I think it's a little hard to judge if you don't know which sort of things they're doing. It depends on the impact on the sprint and the impact on the team. You know.
I think as a coach, it's often, I mean, I think taking them aside is good, as long as you do it in the appropriate way and try and discover why they want to do what they're doing, and try and work with them on, because often there's you know, when someone makes a demand for something, there's often a hidden request, or you know, there's something they're not receiving, so that even though they're becoming belligerent or very disruptive even, there's often something behind it, and trying to discover that thing behind it is the important.
So maybe that's where the coaching comes in, the coaching part of our jobs, where you sit down and just find out what's going on with that person, have a chat.
Yeah, that's right.
I did see one situation before where there's a team member who just wasn't getting up to speed with the code side of things, and I hadn't been a Scrum Master for that long, so I wasn't quite sure what to do, but discussed it, and the team actually did sort that out themselves, and they took it upon themselves to sort that out, and they helped this team member just by, you know, pair programming with them, and helping them to get up to speed, which they did really quite quickly, and it worked wonderfully without having to actually single out this person. They weren't even really that aware that they were being helped by the entire team. It was just part of the process.
In that case, you know, the team's been made aware of the tools they have at their disposal to help other team members. You know, so they obviously knew about the concept of pair programming and code review and those sorts of things. So I guess that's something that we can do as Scrum Masters, is to enable the team to do these things with being aware of these tools.
That's what you want to see, because it's very self-managing, obviously, when that happens as well.
That's ultimately our objective with the Shu Ha Ri type. You know, as your role with the team evolves, you allow the team to be take on more and more of the responsibility of or becoming a self-sustaining team, essentially. It's interesting. For example, when I try to avoid coaching individuals within the team that I'm working with at the moment, in terms of I often will ask the Scrum as a whole if I can make an observation, or and try and encourage them to talk about it and try and solve their own issues. So if they, you know, I'll ask their permission to make an observation, probably after a stand-up, and then let them come up with a solution for how they want to fix it. If they want to fix it, they might not want to fix it. They might think it's perfectly valid what they're doing.
Tony says, thanks, off to read Crucial Conversations again.
What's Crucial Conversations?
I don't know. Well, I shall find out after this.
With that? Yeah, we're going to Google that later.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Lisa Adkins' book, Coaching Agile Teams, is excellent in terms of this as well. You know, she explains a lot of different approaches to.
That is a really good book, and I suppose that's probably available in Amazon and those places.
I think so.
That is called Coaching Agile Teams.
That's right.
By
Lisa Adkins.
I've got a question for you guys who have worked on long-running Scrum teams. I haven't. Do you ever ask for feedback on how you're doing as a Scrum Master, and how do you do that?
I did, and it was basically getting the team together. Well, just walking over to where the team worked, because they worked in a big pod, and saying, "Hey guys, you know, I've been your Scrum Master for a while. Just want to see if there's anything else I can be doing."
So you just did it verbally then?
Yeah, just did it verbally, and you know, just let me know if you want to come over and talk to me, or send me an email if there's things that you think I should be doing or things that I can improve. Please let me know, because I think that's essential. Because you can never think that you're, you know, the best Scrum Master, the best Agile Coach. I think it's important that you keep on learning and keep on being open to that.
And did you get any responses?
Yeah, I got some responses actually, and they were very useful, and I took them on board. I think that's one thing that's important, not only as a Scrum Master, Agile Coach, but as a team member in Agile, really, is to take constructive criticism and to take it well, and to use it well, and you know, you want everybody to be honest and courageous and open, and for that to actually work, you have to be open to that yourself. Yeah,
and then do you find that feedback, well, I've seen in retrospective, certainly does tend to be very constructive. You know, without even really having to remind people not to point fingers or use names and all that sort of thing, people just seem to naturally take to giving constructive feedback quite well, I've found.
I'm hoping that it comes up in the retrospective. I encourage the team to give me feedback about the retrospective. One thing I am going to be doing in the next couple of weeks is the team has changed membership. I've been working with a team for a couple of years, I've been in part of a team for a couple of years, and our membership's changed quite often, and we've got a new product owner and a few new team members. So as the coach, I've decided I'd like to run a reboot of our Scrum, if you like, and to say basically part of that is designing a working agreement with the team to understand what we all want to bring to this relationship as a team. And so it's going to be based on, you know, what they can expect from me, and what they can what I can expect from them as a team, and so on, and what they can expect from each other. And so
that's a great idea. It'd be nice, perhaps, if we could just discuss how that worked out next time and what sort of things you got out of that.
Sure, yeah.
That's an interesting idea, because we have talked about the new teams, and we said we're going to talk about teams that have been using Scrum for a long time,
which we've naturally morphed into talking about, which is nice.
And that's an interesting one, because that's also a team that have been together for a number of years, but with the whole, would you say 50% of it is quite new?
It's quite new, yeah. And so, you know, and we've done team charters in the past. This working agreement is basically a team charter.
That's what I was thinking. It's quite similar.
But it's more of an emphasis on how we work as a team together, our relationship. I think it's just, earlier on, when you've got a new team, the team charter is more about, you know, attending meetings and how you're going to be towards each other, and, you know, courteous and so on. But also it talks about things like technologies and tools that you're going to be using and so on. Whereas the working agreement is more focused on communication and the relationship between team members and coach and each other and so on, you know.
And I think rebooting sounds like a great idea, because obviously the team charter is written usually at the start of a project, and if, you know, half that team has changed, it's absolutely time to sort of reset.
We run in waves, so each wave is 3 months long, and so we've decided to make the next wave, the start of the next wave, the point where we're going to reboot. And we're going to call the product owners in to talk about their vision and so on for the next wave, and then we'll probably start the process by having a wave retrospective for the wave that's just gone,
to cover that period,
and then we'll reboot.
One of the nice things about an established team like that, so one of the older teams, is that when new members do come on board, the existing members are able to model the behaviours that Scrums use. So from what I've seen, those newer members are brought on board quite quickly, as opposed to an entirely new team being started where it can take some time to bed in.
That's right.
Where do you find, because we have talked a little bit about issues in new teams, what issues can come out of a team that's been together for a long time? I'm imagining that some people get maybe a little bit lethargic about some things, like for example retrospectives. People might not come to retros with the same, well, they might be getting stale if they've been, say, doing them once every 2 weeks for 3 years.
Yeah, and I've been trying really hard to keep it fresh in the retrospective, because it is I think it's the most important meeting. It's one of the most important meetings, but and I've been really struggling with that, because it's, we've gone we've gone through all the resources we can find. And it's got to the point now where I'm making retrospectives up according to Esther Darby's framework. So the last time we had a retrospective, I asked the team if they would design a retrospective during the retrospective. So it was fairly successful, but one team member did point out during the retrospective towards the end that they'd come up with they'd got to the point where their decision fatigue had kicked in and they couldn't make any more decisions.
Decision fatigue.
Yeah. And so it's how to deal with that and so on, because like maybe I could have given the retrospective was quite interesting. They said, maybe you could give us options, maybe you could say, you could give us a series of options for each stage, and we could just choose the options then, and so on as we progress the retrospective and so on.
Would that make your preparation period that much longer, or would it not have much effect at all? What do you think?
I don't know, because once you've done it once, then you can just repeat it several.
It's in your head already, I guess.
They've always got the options they can choose from, and we just design retrospectives each time. What it was good was, what I wanted it to do was allow the team to see that when we're doing the deciding what to do or generating insight phase of the retrospective, that they had they owned the retrospective. They could do, if something wasn't working, it wasn't me telling them to vote or group. If there was another way that they could do that, then they could discover that way of, and what they actually came back with was, well, actually we don't know any other ways of doing this, and they put one of my actions from this is to go and research other ways of deciding what to do or generating insight in that part of the retrospective. So anyway, it's given me some work, but the key thing here is it's giving the team ownership of their meeting. And that's I think when you're moving to the Ha and Ri phases of being a Scrum team, the team accepts more responsibility and more ownership of the process. So when they're in the Ha stage, it's their Scrum board, it's their stand-up, it's their retrospect,
really good.
Which is something else you've been doing with this team, giving them responsibility for the Scrum board, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and that, because you've been doing that for a while now, is that working out?
Yeah, it took a while to get the point across, and I felt like I was labouring it to the point of being, I didn't want to, but so I deliberately stopped doing things around the Scrum board. I deliberately stopped putting the burn-up charts on the board without being asked. I deliberately stopped putting stories up when they got pulled into the sprint.
Were people like, hey man, you're not doing your job, or what?
Yes, they were, exactly. They were entirely.
So what was your answer to that?
My answer is, if you want me to, this is your board. If you want me to do something on the board, then you ask me to do it.
Right. So you didn't, you basically didn't sit them down and say, hey, I think you should take responsibility of the board. You just sort of gradually stopped doing things until they started taking responsibility?
I think that, I tried the this is your board approach.
Oh, okay, you tried that first.
And then I went to the...
took the lazy approach.
Took the lazy approach. Took the deliberately lazy approach.
Calculatedly lazy.
That's right. To encourage them to take more responsibility.
Yeah, and of course asking them to ask you to do those tasks shows that it's not a lazy thing. It is something where you ask them to take action.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so, and the interesting thing that's cropped up with the team I'm working with at the moment is they think they're moving to the Ri stage and they want to change their process. Well, one of the team members has flagged it in the retrospective as, do we need to have a different approach from Scrum, which is kind of like...
Is it blowing your mind?
Yeah, it's kind of two eyebrows.
Well, which is what I said when you told me about it. I was like, what?
But of course, Scrum is just one of the frameworks for the Agile approach, and the whole point is if you understand how Agile works, then there's no reason, and you understand why we do the things that we do, then there's no reason why you can't change the process.
We were talking yesterday that any new process, as long as it fits in with the Agile values, that that are the reason we do these things,
Yeah.
then there's no reason why it can't work.
I do think the team has to understand, you know, why they're doing something and why they want to change something.
Yeah.
So that's the re stage. And you need that. I think they need to clarify with you as the coach that they do understand why they want to.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It'll be pretty interesting to hear what actually eventuates
I'm looking forward
from
to an
that.
update on that.
And we are just out of time.
Do we have any more questions, or we?
No more questions. That was it.
Okay.
So
Well, that was fun.
yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you,
for
guys.
watching.
Thank you.
And see you next time.
See you.